Innocent Lives Foundation is an organization that I started that is made up of security professionals that want to help save children from the horrors of child abuse. We use our skills to uncover and unmask those who try to anonymously hide online while spreading, producing, and profiting from child abuse material.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Welcome to Southwest Florida InfoSec community. For those of you who don't know, we meet here in Southwest Florida virtually now, but I'm located here in Naples, as well as several of our other members here, as well as up in Bonita, Fort Myers, and so forth. So we tend to cover most of Southwest Florida. We meet the third Tuesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. We are open and free to the public. And oh, there we go. I got another admission. There we go. And so with us meeting and being open, anybody can join us. And with us being virtual, anybody joins us from the world, around the world, which has been fantastic. With that too, we are a DEF CON group for DC 239. If anybody's headed out to DEF CON, I will be out there. And there's a couple others on the call right now that'll be out there too. So feel free to look us up while we're out there if you want to meet us in person. Also, as you may have heard, I'll be moving next month. I still intend for the foreseeable future to continue running Southwest Florida Sec. So don't worry, it's not going away, not going anywhere. We're going to continue to be around, continue to impact Southwest Florida and spread the InfoSec news and networking and training just as well as we have been. But also now that I'm headed over to the Atlantic Coast in Melbourne, we are starting up Space Coast InfoSec or Space Coast Sec. So we've already got started. Some of you may have already heard about it on Meetup. We do have a Meetup page, website, Twitter, all the great stuff already, LinkedIn, and so forth. We've seen a few people already starting to join, which is great. And we will be hopefully DEF CON group DC 321 or 321, which is interesting history behind that. If you don't know, it was requested by somebody. The 321 area code was requested by somebody in that area after noticing it wasn't an assigned area code, and because it makes for the countdown, right? 321 blast off, and the telephone company happily assigned it to the area. So there you go, a little bit of history of the area. So DEF CON group DC 321, keep an eye out for it. We are already established a Space Coast Sec as well, so you can join us there. We will run our meetings in tandem, so as sister groups. So you can join from either location. Of course, being an InfoSec meetup, we have to share QR codes, right? We tell everybody not to click on stuff like this. Feel free to click on these if you trust me. These would lead to our websites, the SWFLSec website, Space Coast Sec website now, as well as a few of our social accounts. And then, of course, I can't fail to mention our charity of choice, which is Innocent Lives Foundation. They are doing some fantastic things out there in the United States, hopefully eventually expanding to the world, who knows? It would be a great thing though to share their services with the rest of the world. What they do is they head out and they attempt to de-anonymize child predators. And then they turn over those cases to law enforcement for law enforcement to take it further and hopefully take action on these people, get them off the street. Shane is here. Shane is the COO of Innocent Lives Foundation. Shane, do you mind giving a quick blurb about Innocent Lives Foundation, please?
Sure. Thanks. So as Mike mentioned, we are looking for people who are already doing bad things to kids. We identify them, hand them off to law enforcement, let law enforcement do their thing. We have to date 450 cases accepted by law enforcement, and we currently have 69 cases we're working. And that's with about 20 people, 22 people right now doing all of that really ugly work. So it's really important, and we're having great success. If you want to find us, we're going to actually be out at the Sarasota Farmers Market on August the 27th, which is kind of cool. anxious to be starting to get out and about. We are looking to be at Security B-Sides in Fort Myers. Thank you, Mike. And we're going to do an art auction at GERCON, if anybody is going there. And so we are looking for people who are going to GERCON. If you have anything to donate to a geek auction to help us raise some funds. And then finally, I don't know if anyone here is into whiskey, but we have a bucket list item. If this is your thing, Buffalo Trace has granted us a barrel of Weller. And so we're going to be going up and doing a pick. We've got only one ticket left. It's a $5,000 donation request. And it's going to be a full and awesome day. And so if you would like to have more information on that, let us know. And if you have questions on anything, just hit me up. I'll answer anything that I can. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Shane. And if you could go ahead and post some links into our chat so people can find out more information.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. So in our area here in the corner of Southwest Florida, we have several technology groups. We have the Southwest Florida Coders, SWFLSec, which is us, of course. We have OWASP Bonita Springs, which Stephen here's with us. Stephen and I co-lead that one. We are looking for another co-leader to step into my place since I won't be local for that one any longer. So if you're interested in co-leading with Stephen on the OWASP Bonita Springs chapter, feel free to message either one of us and we'll get you set up with what you need to do to be a co-leader. Then there's PyLadies Southwest Florida, which I know Madeline and Inessa have joined forces, I think officially now, between PyLadies Southwest Florida and PyLadies Miami. And so now it's called PyLadies South Florida. So Madeline, I don't know if you want to give a quick blurb about that.
Yeah, we were co-hosting meetups during the pandemic, and I'm actually moving to the UK soon. So I didn't want to just be like, see ya. So we're merging the groups, and she's taken over that PyLadies South Florida.
Wow, so you heard it here first. Madeline is leaving us. Oh, well, hopefully you'll be able to join us occasionally. I know there's that time difference, but you can still pop in and hang out, right?
I'm not leaving the internet.
Okay, there you go. All right, thank you. And when is your next meeting for PyLadies?
I think it's June 30th is the next one.
Great. Yeah, if you don't mind posting the links in chat for PyLadies, that'd be great. All right, and then we have VR and AR of Southwest Florida. It's all the R's, so even XR2 and all those kinds of things. So if you're interested in anything reality, Evie runs that group, and they have some really great meetups. They just had a couple recently, and they're fairly consistent in having at least one every month now. So interested in virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, all the realities, please join them. Then there's the WordPress meetup with Southwest Florida. They've been fairly active lately, meeting with meetups, including other WordPress meetup groups throughout the area, which calls for some great talks and exposure. So that's been good. And there's Southwest Florida Data, which Daniel used to run, but I think it's he had another leader come in to help out with that. And I know they're just getting restarted again. So keep an eye out if you're interested in anything data, whether it's big data, privacy, data security, and so forth. There'll likely be a topic of interest. There's other groups I know that I have not mentioned, and I also don't have their logos, but we are a burgeoning ecosystem here, and that's a great thing, bringing technology to Southwest Florida and in all of its different forms. So feel free to reach out to any of these groups or look on Meetup. All of them are out there. So check them out. With that, there's upcoming events. We won't stay on this. Oops, I was to say we won't stay on this slide very long, and sure enough, we didn't. Anyway, here's the slide of upcoming events. This is, as you can see, most of the groups are on Meetup, so just feel free to look the groups up on Meetup. I won't stay on the slide very long, so unfortunately, you won't be able to copy down, but we will be sharing these slides afterwards. They'll either go up on our Slack if you're on our Slack. If you're not, why not? Feel free to send the request to join and we'll get you hooked up. Otherwise, the slides will go up with the presentation afterwards too. So we will make these available. Upcoming events, as you heard Shane kind of mention, we have B-Sides Fort Myers, which we're organizing right now. It's finally taking off. We are doing this thing this year. We've postponed long enough. People want to get out and get about and have that face time. So we could finally get together at a location that's going to be Florida Southwestern College, or FSW, their Fort Myers campus. They have graciously partnered with us and are allowing us to use one of their larger rooms plus some side rooms for this conference. And it'll be on October 14th and 15th, with the 14th being training sessions, the 15th being presentations, and then just across both days, we'll have a variety of activities. And that's for just the conference. There are also, for that entire week, other activities that are going to be going on throughout the area, whether it's with the college, with the other groups that I listed before. Everybody's taking part in doing something that week. We're the capstone at the end with the conference. But as you know, that is the Cybersecurity Awareness Month of October. And it's also, there's also the Hacktoberfest. I knew I'd remember names. So Hacktoberfest happens that month. I usually see DigitalOcean and GitHub sponsor that. So people can contribute and earn some swag and stuff. So we also have a hackathon that'll be going that week, that Southwest Florida Coders and maybe Pi Ladies, I'm not sure, are going to be co-hosting that. And it'll be over at the Collaboratory in Fort Myers. And I think that one's going to happen on Wednesday, or let's see, Wednesday, that would be the 12th, I think. So on October 12th, I think that's planned for. So keep an eye out as we get closer and more organized. We'll see more and more dates pop up. Although the conference is going to change October 14th through the 15th. You'll see we'll start doing our call for papers, call for presentations, call for sponsors, call for training, hint Corey, and then other activities too, like CTF and villages and whatnot. So this should be a fun conference. Looking forward to having everybody there and being able to enjoy some company physically instead of virtually for once. So this is the time I take a pause. Keep playing with the mouse. Take a pause and give over the microphone to everybody else here. Tell us your needs. Are you looking for a job? Are you looking to hire somebody and staff up? Do you have other needs? Feel free to take this as your time to speak up. So I'll pause here for a few seconds.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. My name is Paul Gudelman. This first virtual meeting I've been to for this group. I did join a meetup group in earlier this month or last month. I am in between jobs, so I am looking for a job. I've got a bachelor's in information security and a large background in network engineering. My last job, I was at LCEC, which is an electronic co-op here in Southwest Florida. So looking around and trying to find some work. Guess that's the most about me.
Great, thanks, Paul. If anybody's interested in talking with Paul, feel free to message him across chat or use the private chat function too. You can do it either way. Paul, welcome back. I think you and I met at our social event at the beginning of the month. Anybody else?
Corey Ball with Moss Adams. Yeah, we're looking to add additional penetration testers onto our team. Minimal experience to 5 years is the range we're looking at. So Paul, you fit right in that range. If you want to send over your resume, we're growing the team.
Great, thanks, Corey.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Pen testing is something I really enjoy. I went to school and college and taking a lot of InfoSec, and then getting out of college, a lot of the work was with networking and as a systems administrator in Linux. So I've been to a couple of B-sides, CTFs, won a few with the team. I can't say that I was pulling most of the weight, but enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, I'll send over my email address in the chat information. So it'd be great. Thank you.
Fantastic. This is one of the reasons we exist, to help connect people. So thank you so much. Mason, I heard you guys are growing. Are you looking for anybody?
Yeah, so we're closing out right now. I mean, we're always hiring, but I think we have the initial 10 to 12, but that it wouldn't hurt. Like if you're an excellent engineer, You can send your resume over to, I'll put the email in chat. We're a fully funded real estate startup here out of Florida, focusing on turning the, home or automating the home selling and home buying process and taking that transaction down from 30 to 75 days to 1 to 15 days. And you can do it with the click of a button. So if anybody's interested, we're hiring Android, full stack, iOS, front end, and back end engineers. So all positions open. And if you have anything that demonstrates exceptional ability, just feel free to send that over and we'll take a look. And if everything looks okay, then we'll schedule an interview.
Great, thanks, Mason.
Great, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, anybody else? All right, well, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my own employer. I work for Arthrex here in Southwest Florida, headquartered here in Naples. We're a medical device manufacturer. We're always looking to grow our IT department, looking for new talent, fresh talent, experienced talent, whatever. Take a look at our website at careers.arthrex.com, see if there's anything there that interests you, and feel free to apply. Like I said, we're a growing company, anywhere from 15 to 20% organic growth year over year. Hard to beat that. And it's great to be in a growing company, especially with the economy starting to be the way it is. All right, I'll give it back one more time. A few seconds, take a pause here. Anybody else? All right, well, if you're thinking of anything as we move along, feel free to use the chat and ask away inside the chat. Connect up there. All right, thanks everybody. So before we move on to our presentation, I don't want to miss out on thanking everybody first. Southwest Florida InfoSec community, which is SWFLSec, and Space Coast InfoSec community, or Space Coast Sec. Would like to thank the following: Innocent Lives Foundation for everything they do for the community, that protect our children, protect people in general, protect trafficking and all that kind of stuff. Uncovering these people. I don't know if we want to call them people, but uncovering them and turning them over to law enforcement to take them off the streets. So thank you, Shane. Thank you, Innocent Lives Foundation. If you want to help them out, Shane has put the link in to chat. You can use this QR code, which will take you to their donation page as well. And then I want to thank tonight's speaker, Corey, for sharing their time and knowledge with us. Really appreciate it, Corey. I reached out to you out of the blue, kind of cold called you over LinkedIn. So I appreciate the willingness to make an appointment with us to speak during our 3rd year anniversary, which I failed to mention right at the beginning of this presentation. This is our 3rd year anniversary. We have been meeting consistently, never stopped once, never been late, never stopped, every month since we began back in 2019, June of 2019. 3 years already. People are like, I can't believe it's been that much time. And I'm like, yeah, tell me about it, right? Even my wife, who's been there the whole time, she's like, wait, it's 3 years? I thought it was only 2. Like, no, it's been 3 years. It's crazy. So thanks everybody for making us such a success, because it really is all you. It's not me that makes us a success. It's our members. So without which SWFLSec and Space Coast Sec would not be successful. If you weren't here, we wouldn't be here. So this certainly shows a need. Everybody coming out every month, just participating with us, learning new things, networking, finding jobs, hopefully, making those connections. It's just fantastic to be part of this community and just being able to help out everybody. So thank you everyone for continuing to come out. We hope to continue on for many years to come. We'll see. Obviously, we're expanding as well, because now we'll be on the Atlantic coast too. And also, Southwest Florida, we want to thank the Southwest Florida and Space Coast community organizations who selflessly operate to lift others. Many of these organizations do this out of their own pockets without donation. They're setting up the infrastructure, meeting spaces, running meetup, their social accounts, everything for free. Participation is free. We don't charge anything. The other community groups I've mentioned previously don't charge anything. Just come out and show up, ask your questions, participate, get to know people, learn something new. It's all free, and everybody here, they do this out of their hearts, to help others. Without helping others, we're unable to get out of this space, right? So we want to lift others up, and that's going to make the whole community here, the whole Southwest Florida, just a better place. So thank you so much, everybody, for being part of this. So with that, everybody's been waiting for this. Thank you. Everybody's been waiting for this. The star of the show, Corey Ball, joining us, author of Hacking APIs. Recently published on No Starch. If you haven't picked up his book yet, I'm biased. I know he's going to be too, being the author. This is just a fantastic book. This is something the industry really needs. We need to drive awareness of hacking APIs. I'm not going to spoil Corey's talk by keep talking about this stuff. Corey, I'm going to hand it over to you now. Thank you so much.
All right. And congrats to you guys. 3 years, that's awesome. But you can tell even from that intro, you have a lot of things going. I mean, even that time to share the job postings and people looking for that. I've been on a lot of these, and there's a lot of other community groups that aren't doing that. So that's pretty awesome. All right. So I am trying to share. Let's see if that happens. There we go. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. So today I'm going to be talking to you about API security testing. You've heard my intro already. I have 12 plus years in IT and cybersecurity. I'm currently says cybersecurity consulting manager, but I was promoted to senior manager over at Moss Adams. So I help lead the pen test consulting practice over there, mentor the team, help provide our clients the best pen tests they can get out there, including network pen tests, web application and APIs. Author of Hacking APIs. Let's see, it came out with No Starch a few months ago, and then the retail release is actually July 12th now. And finally, I'm an evangelist for a company called HackingAPIs. They provide some awesome tools for automatically testing web APIs. So I'm actually working with them now to develop a hands-on course that goes along with the book. And they're going to release that for free once it's available. So I'll be covering the API top 10 from the OWASP API security project. I'm going to do this from my perspective, which is on the red team or penetration testing side of things. I'll go through each one and talk about the sorts of things that I look for when I'm testing. Also, as far as questions or anything like that, if anything comes up, go ahead and ask. I'm horrible at monitoring chat, so if something comes up, feel free to ask. API 1 is Broken Object Level Authorization, also referred to as BOLA. You may have heard this referred to also as IDOR. It's essentially the same thing, which is an API that you have access to doesn't have authorization security controls in place. And so you can authenticate, get your token as user A, and find resource identifiers and then request those. You can either request those or create those as user A, switch out the token as user B, and then make the request for those again. And so here you have a few samples of what you'd see in that request. So maybe something like get API resource 1, or maybe a user ID of 15. And if you're user 15, you should be able to gain access to that. Here you may be posting your company that you're working with, the balance on their account, or you may be performing a password reset on an account that you have. APIs often are taking place in the background. They're not graphical. And so what you see on the web page is one thing, but when you go to reset your password from the web page, it could be and often is using an API to facilitate that request. And you can run into something where the web application is using your token in order to perform a password reset, for example. But then you're able to substitute that out with anyone else's token. And so that doesn't just apply to the password reset, but to all of these. So you can request resources that don't belong to you. You can request account information that doesn't belong to you. The security flaw here isn't that someone is using sequential identifiers for the resource IDs, although that does make it quite a bit easier from the attacker's perspective, but it's the fact that they don't have authorization controls to ensure that user A is only able to access user A's information. API 2 is broken authentication. This is a catch-all for any API authentication related vulnerability. So this could be anything from an API that is providing sensitive information and should have authentication, but it doesn't. It's just openly available for anyone to use. It could be anything from classic authentication issues we've seen since the internet was born, things like bad passwords, weak authentication, weak password policies, anything like that, brute forceable tokens and IDs. Also, on the API side of things, where you're going to see this a lot with web APIs is leaked or exposed private keys and tokens. And a lot of those could be exposed on GitHub more often than not. So anything in that realm is going to fall under API 2 broken authentication. API 3, this is excessive data exposure. So excessive data exposure takes place when an API consumer makes a request from an API provider, and the API provider sends over an entire data set as a response. And you'll see here. So typically, I mean, not even typically, maybe all the time, developers and providers of APIs should not rely on clients for any security controls. And what's going on is the client is requesting maybe their account user information, but in response, the whole data set is sent back. And you're not just getting information related to the requested user. So in this case, it's cloud. And you get things that are to be expected. So cloud's user ID, first name, last name, privilege level. What's not expected and not necessary at all is the administrator that created cloud's account. So you're also getting that in response. So you're getting their full name, their ID, their email address, their privilege level, and whether or not they have multi-factor authentication. So it's not just that the API is sending back too much information, but also that it's sending back sensitive information in addition. API 4 is lack of resources and rate limiting. The API is not sufficiently protected against excessive amounts of requests or payload sizes. Rate limiting is one of the methods that are used to monetize APIs. And so if there's a bypass for this, then that monetization is sort of going to be worthless. And also any method that's able to bypass it is going to spread on the internet, and the provider would lose all sorts of information, all sorts of money on that. But this is also used to limit any requests to an API. So one of the most prevalent requests that should be limited would be the amount of times that a user can guess their own password reset token. If they're able to just make unlimited amounts of requests and it's unlimited, then with a 4-digit code, they'll be able to guess that in 10,000 requests. Additionally, there should be other security controls. You know, a user's limited to 5 guesses before they're locked out and need to verify their account information through email or something. But in the cases where it's not there, you know, a reasonable amount of guesses per minute, probably in the much lower realm. The digit that's used, probably more than 4 digits. There are a lot of things that could improve the situation, but this is out there and you see it quite a bit. So in these cases, users attempting to reset the password using a token, there are 2 different ways to go about dealing with rate limiting. One is to fly under the radar and attempt to guess this token in under the allowed amount of requests. So if I can make 100 requests per minute using the API, then to guess this, I would just guess 99 times, let that 100th time go, wait another minute, make it 99 more requests, and in under 30 minutes, I'll have guessed the token using the valid rate limiting. The other way is to bypass the rate limit altogether And depending on how the API is developed, a lot of these tricks will actually work, which is, doing something as simple as case switching. So instead of making this initial request, you case switch to an uppercase A, uppercase U in this situation. And sure enough, that may not be counted against you when you go to guess. So you make 10,000 requests where each different letter is upper or lowercase. Maybe you add a question mark at the end, or you do a combination of things where you're doing case switching and adding a null byte at the end. And all of those could potentially bypass whatever rate limiting controls are in place for the API. API 5 is broken function level authorization. This is another authorization related vulnerability that's common with APIs. Similar to BOLA, it is about a user only being allowed and controlled to perform certain actions that they're allowed to control with their own account. So BOLA or BAFLA typically takes place when user A is able to perform actions against user B's account, or user A is able to perform administrative actions that don't align with the role that they have. So if we're talking about a social media API, then I should not have the ability to delete other users' pictures and social media posts. If we're talking about, fintech API, then BOLA would be the ability to request another user's bank account balance. BAFLA would be the ability to transfer another user's bank account balance over to your balance. Counts for different companies. So if a user is with Apple, or they'll have different methods for creating administrative users. If they're not restricting the user input, then an attacker could potentially guess some of the parameters that they're using to make that adjustment to the data object. So in this attack here, we're registering for an account and we're guessing how the provider is creating admins on the back end. And this request, it could be sent in a single request where you just brute force a bunch of different keys and variables. And you're using admin true, admin one, is admin true. Essentially, if you're doing this, you don't know what they're using, but they're probably using something. And if there's no restriction on the size of the request, then you can just send all of these over in a single request and something might stick and you become the administrator. If there is a restriction, then you can just make this same request 20 different times with potential variables. And so if instead of admin, we were talking about company, and my company was Moss Adams, and I thought, this company also does business with Google, so I'm going to try and create myself a Google account and get those privileges. Then you would perform the same thing, and it would probably be easier because in the documentation it would say username, email, company name, and I could just guess some other company names that are out there and see what sticks. API 7, this is another catch-all for any generic security misconfiguration issue. When it comes to vulnerability scanning tools, which I'll talk about more later in this talk, they're really good at catching API 7. They're not so good at catching any of the others, currently anyways. So things you'll see here, SSL-related problems, verbose messaging, verbose headers, directory traversal, and default configurations. If an underlying system has published vulnerability, that's going to be detected here. API injection. So even though SQL injection has been published for over a couple decades, it was ported over to APIs and still plagues the internet. So with APIs, you can perform SQL injection, NoSQL injection, cross-site scripting, and system command injection when there aren't security controls in place. And as an attacker, again, we're looking for requests that are allowing for user input to be processed. And in this case, this is editing a user's profile And what we do when we're going to check for it, we're going to go into all of the different parameters and fuzz them for potential vulnerabilities. So we'll send over things that would trigger SQL responses, NoSQL responses, cross-site scripting. It can be done with APIs, but things do have to align the right way. The information provided over the API needs to be processed and put into the web page without any filtering. And then if the user were to launch their profile or refresh it, then if the cross-site scripting wasn't filtered, it could launch something in the browser. And then similarly to SQL and NoSQL, there's also system command injection. So we'll just test the fields for a variety of inputs with a variety of inputs that would cause some sort of error or response that we could take advantage of. API 9 is improper assets management. So with REST APIs, companies will often use versioning within the path. And so you'll see things like targetname.com/API/v1, v2, v3, test, UAT, whatever it is, or you'll see these in subdomains. And improper assets management isn't the fact that multiple versions exist, but it's more like an unsupported software vulnerability. So if an entire version of an API is no longer supported, then there's a good chance that any vulnerabilities that plagued it in the past are still around and exploitable. So when we find or are testing an API that may be on version 3, one of the first things we're going to do is see if there's any information about the version changes. So is there anything on GitHub that talks about why they moved from v1 to v2, v2 to v3? We're also going to be looking in their documentation for any notes. If we do see that v3 is the version that the API is on, then we find that certain requests with v1 are successful, then we're going to go back and focus our efforts on that version. So it's not the fact that there is another version, but it's the fact that the other version is no longer supported by the provider. So it likely has some vulnerabilities. Same thing with versions that aren't meant to be public. So if we find a test or a UAT version that's publicly available, then we'll go and test those for the past vulnerabilities that we've covered up to this point. Also, a note on improper assets management. This is one of the top 10 here that I think is more important with the Great Resignation and everything that's gone on in the last year and a half, where you see things like 60% of developers considering a career change and such. If you're counting on a developer to manage a certain version and they're no longer there and it's not well documented, then this is the vulnerability that we're going to see come up quite a bit more. And just like any good OWASP list, the final one is insufficient logging and monitoring. Lack of logging, monitoring, and alerting will allow attacks to run rampant, unnoticed, and there will be little to no chance of attribution. So that covers the OWASP API Security Top 10 list. Now I'm going to talk about some of the dangers involved with using the wrong tools to test APIs. Or not just the wrong tools, but using the wrong tools in the wrong way. So a lot of us that have been in vulnerability management, we have a way that we've tested things historically. So maybe you use a Nessus scanner to scan your environment, or Qualys, or anything else. And it's been reliable with scanning servers and maybe some web applications and coming back with some results. It doesn't work so well with APIs, and we'll get into that here in a minute. So this is just talking about the dangers of false negatives. False negatives are when vulnerabilities are present, but they're not detected. And that's what we see out of a lot of the tools that are used generically to scan APIs. So some of the bigger dangers, maybe the biggest danger with a false negative is if you're trying to get a budget to protect your APIs, but all the tools you have are telling you that there's nothing wrong, that could be a challenge to justify getting the budget to get the right tools in place. And so I have some recommendations that I'll provide at the end of this that could help your exact situation. So this is a case study on the USPS informed visibility data leak in 2018. One of the key features that drove the innovation behind this program was their new API that they were making available. The USPS Office of Inspector General performed a vulnerability assessment, and that report was released on October 12th, 2018. This report is publicly available. You can check it out using this link here. Really interesting read, especially because by November 21st, 2018, they were on Krebs. So the USPS site exposed 60 million instances of private data. There are some quotes in the report, things like overall, the Postal Service complied with Postal Service security control requirements and industry best practices for the externally facing and supporting IV servers and databases. So, not too negative there with that statement. Some other fun facts about the report. If you go into it, you do a quick Control F and search through it for APIs. There are no mentions of APIs in it. And this isn't to throw them, the vulnerability management program or the inspector general here under the bus. This is October 2018. The OWASP API security top 10 didn't even come out until December 2019. So this is ahead of the curve here. We talked earlier about the need, for resources in this realm, and it's been there for a while. Yep, I already talked about all that. So the issue here, if you go into that report, there's an appendix, and I think it's Appendix A, it talks about the tools that they use. So what I did is I hosted a vulnerable application, which is put on by the OWASP API security project called Crappy. I hosted that in an environment, and then I used some of the tools that they talked about in the report against it, so you could see some of the results that they got. I didn't use HP Web Inspect, but instead I used Nikto, Zap, and Burp Suite Pro. So this is an application that has all 10 of the vulnerabilities, and we're not seeing anything here with this Nessus scan. These scans, I didn't do any customization to help them work with APIs, so they're testing them generically if you just plug and play. So nothing here on the Nessus scan. This is the Burp Suite Pro scan. This is from last year. They've likely made some improvements to help the results out, but so far they're only picking up API 7, the security misconfiguration. So they're seeing frameable responses, so maybe clickjacking. Same thing here. This is a Nikto scan that has some interesting directories to check out and catches the X-frame options for clickjacking, but outside of that, nothing too interesting. And finally, the Zap scan, X-frame options, API security, number 7. So with all these, if you're using these, sort of industry standard tools to test out web APIs, you're going to get a lot of results like this that provide a false sense of security and leave the API provider vulnerable. So the value of good penetration testing and bug bounty. Penetration testing is a point-in-time adversarial test of a web app and APIs. So when the right tools and techniques are used, which with the release of the OWASP API security project, my book, other resources out there, not too many excuses anymore. But when the right tools and techniques are used, they'll reveal real vulnerabilities and can provide proof of concept for what could be done with those vulnerabilities. So it's not just going to be a scanner that says, there's an improper assets management vulnerability because we found this different version, but it's going to be that full, how can that lower level vulnerability be combined with others to exploit the API in a more severe way. Bug bounty programs, typically bug bounties are a continuous test of your API, or at least they can be. This is another valuable layer that can be added for testing. Bug bounty communities often contain a mix of awesome hackers at various levels of expertise. Bug bounty programs will often provide your API security testing with a variety of skill sets. You'll have hunters out there that specialize, APIs are what they do, and they find their vulnerabilities across the board using their tools and techniques. And then you can also incentivize hackers and bug bounty hunters to focus on those issues. If there's the new latest and greatest vulnerability, then you can put an incentive out there to make sure that your APIs are covered. Both of these are great. Unlike a generic scanner, they're not going to pick up something that beyond the API top 10 doesn't cover. They're not going to, scanners are really bad at catching business logic vulnerabilities. So you may have some sort of, maybe like a password reset where you're trusting your users that are logged in to be able to use a password reset function. So all that happens is when they go to reset their password, it just sends their current token or their current user ID along with their new password. And so the business logic flaw there would be, if you have that layer of trust, then if they find another user's token, or if they find another user's ID, they can just reset that password. Both of these are good for finding business logic flaws. Both of these will leverage lower level findings to find more complex attacks. And they both provide that extra layer of assurance that the API security program is not just, safe and sound because some tools that were used said so. But if you did want some tips on testing out your vulnerability management program, you could set up a secure lab with one of these deliberately vulnerable apps. And then you can use the tools that you're currently using for an API vulnerability management program against these apps, just like I did, and see how effective they are. So whatever tool you may be in use, you scan these. If they're coming back with only those security misconfigurations, so API 7, they're not coming back with everything else that plagues these, from authorization vulnerabilities, authentication issues, then you know there's a problem, and you need likely to upgrade the tools or to configure the tools to work with these. Burp Suite would be a good one. Burp Suite, just set to automatically scan may not pick up the action that's required to use a valid username and password to gain a legit API token. And so if it's not getting past that, then it's not going to see everything bad that could take place with that token. When testing API vulnerabilities, make sure to configure the tools in the correct way. Do not trust the automated scans. Add layers to the API security testing by including penetration testing, bug bounty hunters. Essentially get another perspective. If everything is coming up clean and has been for a while, that's probably not the case, that there are no findings. And then, use the guidance provided in the OWASP API Security Top 10 to help your program out. One of the issues I talked about was the Great Resignation. And so if there is a case where an API may have been supported by a developer and they're no longer with the company, there are plenty of API providers that don't even know about the APIs that are in their environment. And so one awesome free tool that's out there is KiteRunner. KiteRunner is really good. It's put on by Asset Note, and they have a really cool talk about how they developed the tool. You can check that out. They essentially scan the entire internet for all of the API endpoints and how to request from those APIs. And they put this tool together that was more built to essentially directory brute force web APIs. And so if you were to compare this to a tool like GoBuster or Dirbuster, something like that, or FFUF, anything, those tools are going to make requests to the directory that you tell it to. So if we have API v1/ whatever you want to fuzz in there, GoBuster, Dirbuster, and FFUF are all going to use the word list that you provided to guess. And with a REST API, if you just had something generic there like /accounts, so API v1 accounts, it may not respond because it may not respond in a unique way that says there's something there. So all of those tools, they're going to get some sort of 400 response maybe and just move on like nothing is there. But KiteRunner, they developed the requests to fit the form of web APIs. And so it would actually have API v1 accounts and maybe some bogus number. And you'll get a unique response that says, hey, that user ID doesn't exist. And that's going to pop out like sore thumb, and KiteRunner will flag it and show you, hey, there's something here. Another really cool tool is this man-in-the-middle proxy to Swagger. Essentially, you can use this to monitor a network. It'll pick up the API requests that are going across it, and it will make documentation for you. And that documentation can then be plugged into a tool like Postman, where you can build out a collection and have the various APIs and the requests. And then you can go and proceed with attacking those. Oftentimes, private APIs had been the hardest to attack because there's no documentation, so you don't know what a well-formed request look like. But if they're going across the network, this tool will pick them up. You can put it into Postman and carry out your attack just like you had the documentation. This is on the more advanced side. If program has their API security well handled, they could use some of these deception techniques, potentially putting accounts out there that an attacker would be really interested in and making it easier to get to. And once that account or token is used, it could maybe send out some emails to notify an incident response team to deal with an attacker. And that is all I have for this. And any questions or anything anyone has, we can cover those now.
Can you just kind of go through your flow of what you do when you go and you start, and what tools you actually use? Can you
Definitely.
talk a little bit about?
Yeah. And so there's like, after you scope out a project, after I scope out a project with a client, I have an idea of the API that I'll be handling. One of my questions that I ask very early on, that is a very important question, is your API defined? Meaning, do you have specs for it? Is it documented? Can I put it into a collection and test it easily? I've had documentation that has like handwritten notes on it. So I've dealt with, no documentation at all, or getting a PDF or documentation which isn't going to be ingestible by Postman or any tool out there. So I'm going to have to manually build out requests. So the first thing is your API defined? Yes or no?
Like a white paper.
What I mean by that is if you go on to any website that's providing an API, APIs are often, at least public APIs, are meant for consumption, meant for public consumption. And so they make it easier for developers who know what they're looking for to find and use them. That's often the intended reason that they exist. So if you're in that mindset of I'm a developer that wants to use their API, you would go on to their landing page, you would find the developer notes page, or maybe even just an API page. And that will have maybe a Swagger file or open API. And essentially these are, and I'm happy to pull up examples too, if I can pull some stuff up to show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, you can pull up a file that is digestible by or importable into various tools that I'm going to use to thoroughly test an API out. So and I'll share my screen again. So this is Programmable Web. This is an API repository, so you can learn more about certain APIs that are out there. This is for Airbnb specifically. So when if I'm approached by Airbnb and they want us to test their APIs, the first thing I'm going to ask is for their documentation, and they'll point me to this link here. That's the API portals on the partner page. See if there's any other interesting things. It's showing up they have a REST API. They're on version 1.0. And so then I would go over to their partner page, connect to our API. Yeah, so that they have, you have to be a legit user of it, and there are instructions here. If this is a pen test, there aren't going to be this many layers. They'll probably just provide me with the documentation. Let's see if I can find another here. So we'll do like Reddit. Okay, and so here you can see the documentation defines how you interact with the API. So this is one of the first things that I'm looking for. And then if there's a digestible version out there, something like .swagger or OpenAPI, then it turns this into a file that you can then import into a tool like Postman. So getting through the process, first thing, is the API defined? Yes. Okay, here's the documentation. My next step is to build out a collection in Postman. And so if a client has one of those files, then I can just use the import functionality in Postman, and that will give me every single request that is meant for use for that API. And you'll see things like, maybe an endpoint for account management, an endpoint for posting in a forum or social media. And there I'm looking for what requests can I use that can get me sensitive information. Perhaps, starting out, it's going to be about my own account. And so I approach it from that use it as an end user before I start attacking it approach. And I'll go through, make some requests, make sure I have an idea of how authentication works, what sort of token I'm given for authorization, and make sure I can just make requests as the API was designed. From there, I'm going to filter through for those requests that deal with sensitive information, perhaps about my account, perhaps about groups or something like that. And then I'm also going to filter for requests that take user input. So if I'm able to update my own profile and there are 10 different parameters involved with my profile, then that's going to be one that I'll focus on, and I'll proxy that request over to something like Burp Suite and substitute out the fields for username, password, email address, all those different things, and fuzz those to see what sorts of responses I get. Then I'll filter those responses to see, which sort of requests triggered a result or an interesting response, whether that's an interesting response code or an interesting response body. And I'll go through those and see what's what. And from there, that's when you can get into the different types of attacks that I covered. So you can focus on injection vulnerabilities in that. You can, let's see, what other ones? Authorization related vulnerabilities. I'm going to make all of my requests as user A. Then I'm going to save, those are going to be saved in Postman. And then I'm going to substitute out my token with a user B token. And can I still request all of user A's information? Can I perform actions as user A? And I'm going to test that from there. Excessive data exposure is one of the interesting ones, because literally to test that, you just have to use the API as it was designed. So when I'm making requests for my account information, the example I gave where I got the admin that created my account, that's something, if you see that, then you're going to take note of that, and that's a vulnerability on its own. But you, in that instance, which isn't too uncommon, you may also get the admin's user ID. And sure enough, there's a different part of the API that you find out that uses the user ID to make some requests. Okay, can I substitute out my user ID for the admin's user ID and make requests? That is a lot of it. Then, the techniques that I use are going to be, APIs can be ginormous. So you can have a single API that has like 250 requests, unique requests that you can make. So I'm going to want to use, in that situation, something like Postman that has a cool function called the collection runner to test across, I call it fuzzing wide, which is you're fuzzing all across the entire API and all the different requests that are out there. If I were to do that in Burp Suite, I would have to, individually test it out or use Intruder on 250 unique requests. Instead of doing that, I can use the Postman collection runner. I can create some variables across the board. If I want to substitute out the token that's used for an injection attack, or maybe --space dash to see if there's some sort of SQL response, I can just substitute that out as a variable, run the collection runner, and it will make 250 requests across the whole API using that. And so the whole thing is starting out with a really wide focus and then just zeroing in on those potential vulnerabilities. Any other questions?
Also, don't forget, if you don't want to speak, you can use the chat to post your questions in chat as well. We'll ask those questions to Corey too. While we wait for that, Corey, where did you get all of those? Well, I should rephrase. Are all of those Legos in your slides yours? Or did you grab those from a program? Or
I wish that. Yeah, I wish they were. No, I use some Google dorking skills to pull out all the awesome Lego pictures to match up with the slides. My wife is an amazing graphic designer, so she will help design the presentation, and then we will go back and forth about the right Lego piece to use in the right situation.
Yeah, kudos on the Lego pieces. Those were pretty dang amazing. I just had to say that out loud.
Not just amazing, but really apropos. So where can we get your book?
You can get the book now over at nostarchpress.com/hacking-APIs. If you just go on nostarchpress.com, it'll be like one of the top 6 books there. that is available now. And then in a few more weeks, July 12th, you can get it off of Amazon. You can get it in Barnes & Noble. I heard soon you can get it in traditional Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. So that's pretty sweet too.
Oh, congrats.
Thanks.
There is huge benefits though from buying it from No Starch. No Starch. So, yeah, go ahead.
Biggest benefit is that that version comes with the ebook, which is pretty sweet. And then it's also available now instead of having to wait a few more weeks.
I think No Starch probably treats their authors a lot better than Amazon or other sellers.
What level should I be at here to take a look at that book? If I'm a complete noob, is this for me, or do I need to go in with some knowledge?
That's a great question. While I was writing the book, I wanted to make it possible that a new hacker could have APIs be the first thing that they ever hack. And so I wrote it from zero to hero. There also, it builds up too. So I have some more advanced techniques getting into the authorization section and later into evasive techniques to bypass security controls. So I really hoped to make it approachable to anyone that wants to get into API hacking.
I also see the book here on O'Reilly. I have an O'Reilly subscription and I was able to find it there.
So people have been asking about that. I don't know much about it. So with an O'Reilly subscription, you can get the No Starch book. HackingAPIs.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, looks like I can start the e-version right now.
Cool.
Good to know.
So I've got a question about legalities. If they publish the API and then you choose to use it, at what point do you cross a line, or do you if it's published?
So just like any other pen testing, I would only suggest testing what you're authorized to test. And an important thing there is, you could be pen testing a company and they really want you to test out their APIs, but once you dig into it, you find those are not their APIs. That's a third-party API that they're using for their business. So you cannot test those unless you have that third party's permission. But like I said, as far as legality goes and using the API as it was designed, some of these vulnerabilities are essentially by design. So you could stumble upon some just by using it.
So it's with the third party, right? It's APIs all the way down. Like,
yeah. Yep.
You got your customers that's hired you to take a look at it, but then they've got third party APIs they're using. Those third parties have their APIs that they're using, and it kind of just chains. It could chain in ways.
Yeah, well, that and with API first and the API economy and everything that's involved with that, like one of the enabling factors of APIs as a technology, they enabled companies to no longer specialize in everything. So you could take a ride-sharing company. They're not going to be the developers of the map. They're not going to be the developers of the instant messaging system. They're not going to be developing all those different things. They just put all these different APIs into a mashup. And yeah, so then you have a unique situation where there are 5 different third parties that are really just powering this ride-sharing tech.
Did that answer your question, Shane?
Hey, Corey, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, John.
So for API 4 with the rate limiting issues, you mentioned that there's a technique that attackers can use to kind of mutate each request a little bit and kind of bypass the filter that they might be doing. Is there a defense for that type of bypass where you're making little changes here and there?
So I can only provide my remediation recommendation, but I'm not a developer, so I don't know per se. But I would guess if the request was whitelisted and case sensitive to, it has to be in this form. If it's not, then it's sending out a different response. So there shouldn't be a 200 response if I'm switching the cases, or there should be maybe a 300 response that forwards me back to the intended URL to make that request again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So is that sort of similar to validating your input then? You're doing some type of controls in place to sanitize what's being seen? Yeah,
I think so. That goes for mass assignment too. If an end user registers for an account and it only has username, password, email or something, then there should be nothing else allowed in that request besides those expected items.
So if somebody wanted to set up a home lab just to play around with, what would be your recommended, like just starting out at that level, what would you put together?
Yep. So I have 2 whole chapters. Just to talk about the book a bit more, I have 2 chapters dedicated to setting up your own attacking system and vulnerable lab. So in there, I have 4 vulnerable applications. If there was just one to focus on, I'm a huge fan of OWASP Crappy. I can send the link for that too. That one, I think about a month ago, it just went into version 1.0. So that is a good one to play with. And if you can set it up on just kick up in Ubuntu, or if you have Kali Linux, you can just run it on your own Kali Linux, localhost everything. But yeah, all of the attacking labs in the book guide you through exploiting different vulnerabilities in Crappy. The examples throughout the book, I use an older one that was put out by DevSlop. I don't think they're supporting it anymore, but I'm still a huge fan of that one too. It's called Pixie. I'll put the link.
It was like John F. asked, did you get to pick the cover of your book?
Good question. Yeah. So just with writing the whole thing, picking the cover actually was really important to me. And I've been thinking about it a lot for probably about a month. And one night it hit me exactly what I was going to do. And so I was inspired by Elon Musk's Space Roadster that was out there. And I thought, what if that Space Roadster was blowing up the Death Star and speeding away from it? So I thought of that classic scene where the Death Star is exploding in the background and all the heroes are flying away from it. So I replaced that with the Roadster. And I had some other ideas, Postman, they used a lot of space references for their logo and stuff. And I thought of, what if the emblem on the car was the Burp Suite logo? But yeah, I don't think No Starch wanted to get into the copyrights area for that stuff. So, but even with all that, so I woke up at 3 a.m. I took down all the notes. I probably wrote out 3 paragraphs. I gathered a bunch of screenshots. I sent it all over to No Starch, and they said, we only give our cover artist, 1 sentence. And so break all that down into a single sentence. And I had an astronaut flying a rover away from an exploding Death Star. And sure enough, the very first edition, the astronaut was scared and driving a roadster on like a planet, and the Death Star was still exploding in the background. So I said, the astronaut, my only correction, the astronaut is happy, which is like so subtle. There's like a tiny dash for a smile. The astronaut is happy, they're not scared, they're excited and successful from helping explode the Death Star. And then there's this whole other thing where it's like APIs are the pipelines into businesses now. And you don't, if you're doing an external network pen test, to get in can be very challenging because people have been putting up organizations have been putting up security controls since hackers existed. So you have to get past the web application, you have to get past the firewall, you have to get on a device in the network, you have to be able to pivot to a point where you're getting domain admin, and then you have to exfiltrate everything that you want. Instead of doing all of that, you could just use the API as it was designed, because that bypasses all those things and gets you straight to the crown jewels, which are the data of that company.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do with APIs, and seeing that as one of the next challenges. And people, companies, organizations already have challenges with asset management. Now throw in there trying to figure out, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, figuring out all the APIs that you have in use across your whole organization. Just having that visibility, what's their surface, it's just, it seems like it's going to be a very hard problem. So it's going to be something around for a while where we need people who are good at testing APIs, good at securing APIs. So a red team, blue teaming, right? To really focus on those now, because it certainly makes it easier to exfiltrate that data out of the organization without ever getting on, like you said, domain admin, not getting somebody who has permissions within the network itself on a machine, but just do it through a website or a mobile app or some other connection. John asks, advice for writing a technical book. What would you do the same and different?
So I just signed on with No Starch Press for book number 2. So I'm going through this again right now. One of the main, if I had a regret about the first book is that it was written during COVID. So the best part about writing the whole book was connecting with other awesome people in the industry and people that develop the tools, people that have developed some of the techniques, and connecting with them to help enhance and improve the book. So not being COVID anymore, one of the things I'm looking forward to is connecting more with other people. Like, as much as I was in a box for other techniques and tools that were out there, I still got to connect with people. So like Asset Note, for example, I have a section in the book on Kite Runner. I ran into an issue. I told them what was going on and was able to work with a lot of their team to work out some of the issues I was running into. And just connecting with that team was pretty awesome. So advice for writing a technical book, the way I went about it is the whole inception of the book came about because Moss Adams, penetration testing consulting, started to get a bunch more requests for APIs specifically. I was the main web app tester at the time, so they came to me and said, we want you to be the API pen tester. I went on Amazon and looked up hacking APIs. There was nothing out there. So I started to take a bunch of notes, and I just did a brain dump of everything I already knew. I went into some of the more historical sources, like the Web Application Hacker's Handbook, and maybe some of the other web app testing books that had come out. And essentially, a lot of those maybe had 1 to 3 pages that mentioned APIs, and testing them was like a paragraph. Look for authorization vulnerabilities. So I took that stuff. I took a bunch of notes, and with a book like this, I think I'm in the 350 page realm. There's not a wrong way of going about writing too much. It would take a while to get to that point. So just writing whatever I was interested in at the time, and just consistently spending an hour to 3 hours per day sitting down at the keyboard, writing out notes and such. So I got to about 150 pages of notes. And then one thing I would do different from that time to this time is the first thing I did is I built up the skeleton. And that's really how you would propose a book to No Starch Press, is they're going to ask you for the chapter outline. And then they're going to ask you for, sub points of each of the items in the outline. And so I didn't know that at the time. I didn't even know I was writing a book. I had 150 pages of notes that I thought I was going to use internally to get down to a more bite-sized version for the pen test team. But at that point, I had enough to where I was like, what else can I do with this? And No Starch Press helped me go through the process of, okay, we need the outline, first of all, and see what all the sections are going to be about. So I'd break out an outline. That's what I'm doing this time around. So I already have the outline. I already have the subpoints. I have a general idea of where the book's going to progress. Important things for me with technical books, there's the try harder mentality, which you could see in some of the other technical books that are out there, which is, I taught you everything in this chapter. Good luck. Go try this out. Go find this thing. I'm more of I learn the best from being side by side with other professionals, and they don't have their hands on my keyboard because that's a cardinal sin, but they will sit there with me, and I'll try and exploit something, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, and then go this way, and then try this thing. And so my labs were developed much more along that. So that's very important to me as a technical writer, that I'm not necessarily hand-holding, but I'm also not on the try harder side where it's like, I gave you the material, good luck. How am I taking notes? Actually, I've tried out a bunch of different things, whether it was OneNote or Words or Evernote. I do like the way OneNote is structured. I can easily put in screenshots that aren't going to be malformed later on. And it's, I could search through images and different things like that. So I do like OneNote for the note-taking side. Before, I literally had 150-page Google Doc where everything's searchable there, but it would take a while to get up and running and search through it. Second book about, no, I'm not going to disclose not yet what the second book's about. I want to have some meat on the bones of it before, before I'm in like a space race for the next book idea. Personal opinion about the pros and cons of GraphQL. So that was an interesting thing. When I finished my book, I have one chapter at the end on GraphQL, hacking GraphQL, and it seemed like the obvious follow-up book for me, but I was like, I've covered REST APIs and I want to move on to new topics. And so on LinkedIn, I actually called out the developer of Damn Vulnerable GraphQL, which is the vulnerable GraphQL API application that I have featured in my book. And I said, I'm leaving the spiritual successor to you. What I didn't know is that 3 days before, they signed on with No Starch Press for Black Hat GraphQL, which is like to be determined on the release date, but they actually asked me to be the technical editor on it. So I agreed in participating in that. So as far as like the approaches go, yeah, GraphQL is a different beast. It handles requests in a different way. Instead of having a bunch of different endpoints for the data that you want, there's going to be a single endpoint, and you're going to, just like making SQL queries, you're making GraphQL queries to get the exact data that you're looking for. And instead of getting a bunch of different response codes, there's going to be one GraphQL endpoint, and it's probably going to give you a 200 response for anything that you do. And the errors and such are going to be within the body of the response. So one of the things while writing my book is I wanted the techniques to be applicable across industries and be applicable towards future technologies. So I made it more generic in a way that could be applied to, if you come across a web API in healthcare, if you come across a web API in ICS or something, then you're going to be able to use these same tools and techniques. So a lot of the attacks, you can still attempt those in a very similar way, and you can still have that API attacker mindset to know the sorts of things that you can look for within an API.
So Paul asked, do you have a coupon code for No Starch?
Sorry, do I have a what?
Coupon code?
No, I think I'm supposed to, but I don't have a coupon code. I know there's.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was part of it.
Okay.
They give you stuff to try to advertise your own. I didn't know. Figure it out.
Oh, for them to track that's coming in from me or something? Yeah, I don't.
Sorry, we had a big storm here yesterday, and it took out my audio equipment. So I'm having to use my phone, so I'm muting and unmuting both. But no, not necessarily to track you. Just I would imagine No Starch or companies that published would give writers codes so that one, you could track it, but two, just to help advertise or promote your own book. That's all. Just figured it out.
Yeah, what I do have is I have my own set of books, which I should have some, and you can find those on my website here under the book tab. But yeah, I have my own set that I sell, but yeah, typically I just send people to the publisher.
Yeah, the great thing is too, if you watch No Starch's Twitter feed or you're on their mailing list, they'll often post coupon codes. They just went through a string of them recently. I knew, especially there was Father's Day. Yeah. There was another one they ran for a bit. My guess is July 4th coming up. They might post another one.
That's a good guess.
John asked, do you think you answered my question? Is attacking GraphQL and security in all cloud providers the same, or does it depend?
So yeah, whether we're talking about REST or GraphQL, each provider, each instance that you come across can be unique. And so finding the documentation is pretty important, because even if we're talking about REST APIs where we have a target that's going with the directory structure of API v1 accounts, you could have another one that's v1 API accounts. You could have another one that's subdirectory API dot target name /v1. You can run the gambit, and so that could all be different across the board. With GraphQL, there is a cool thing that could be disabled, but not in all situations, called an introspection query. I can type that in. When it's enabled, you can send over this big request, and the GraphQL endpoint will respond with essentially what you can do with the GraphQL API. And if you're using a tool that's meant to interact with GraphQL, something like Altair, Altair, or some of the other tools that are out there like Voyager, essentially you can make this query, and then you can have the entire relationship of how all the requests work together visualized, which is helpful. And you can also see, the sorts of things that you could request for and how to request for them.
Is there really a good reason to have introspection turned on? Why wouldn't we just have it turned off by default?
The classic cybersecurity problem of convenience versus security. Not only that, but certain deployments of GraphQL, depending on the tools that you're using, may not allow you to turn off introspection at all. So yeah, it does come down to, so like if we're talking about API documentation, which could be similar, should an API provider allow anyone to access their API documentation? I mean, the thing that we're talking about at that level is depending on security through obscurity. So just the fact that people, if we hide the documentation, then the attackers aren't going to know as easily how to make well-formed requests. But as far as the business case for the API goes, that means all of our end users aren't going to know how to make those requests as well. So that could be a challenge. And then, do you get into having to have a partner level account where it's provided? We saw that with Airbnb earlier when we went to get the API documentation and it was behind an authentication wall. So they are doing some of that where you do need to know, you need to be approved, which is also what Twitter does. So you have to apply and you have to have your use cases for why you want access to the API, and then they'll grant it. They granted it to me, so I imagine they probably granted it to most people.
Yeah, sort of like the hidden APIs of iOS, right? We used to hear about that quite a bit, where people were abusing APIs because they figured out what the calls were, but they were undocumented. So obscurity doesn't necessarily work.
Right. Yeah, and that happens a lot with private APIs. It could just be a team of developers internally using this API for convenience with each other. So they don't do things like, why would we need authentication when it's just us using it, until an attacker gets inside the network, they monitor the traffic, they see the API calls that don't require tokens or anything, and an attacker can just grab whatever data is being sent across.
That's an interesting pivot. Come in the traditional way, but once you're inside, look for those private APIs.
Yeah, that's some of the breaches over the last few years. You see that for exfiltration, attackers were using API calls out of the organization. So they're already in, they already captured the information. Then they were using the API requests outbound because those weren't monitored at all.
Zabir asks, what's the name of the GraphQL hacking book again? Any estimates when it is going to be released? Oh, Corey, you answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, name of it's Black Hat GraphQL. I don't know the release date of that, but it's Dolev Fari and Nick Alex. They're two guys that specialize in GraphQL, and they are trucking through it. They're making a lot of headway. So I really don't think it's going to be as well. It's not going to be anywhere near as long as my book. So I don't have a good guess, but I don't think it's going to be that much longer.
From start to end, I guess, towards that subject, from start to end, how long did it take you to write the book from beginning to when it was published?
So I was put in charge of API pen testing December of 2019, and then I decided to propose the book by February of 2020 and signed on with No Starch, I think early March 2nd or something like that. So it took about a total of 2 years. The writing portion probably took a year to maybe 16 months. The rest is editing, technical editing, copy editing, all the different editings, which, I'm grateful for. In the end, now at this point, I'm grateful for it. Turned it into a much better product than I could have made on my own, for sure.
Any more questions? I do have one more, but I'm holding off. All right, I'll go with mine. Maybe you'll trigger some other questions. Somebody's got to ask it because it hasn't been asked yet. What are your thoughts on Web3 and API usage through the blockchain and other technologies that are now being used to to form this new thing?
Yeah, the techniques in the book, like I said, I tried to make them future proof. So I think, especially with how much APIs are involved with Web3, that it's going to go hand in hand with that. But yeah, there's going to be some differences on the front end. Web3 is going to appear very similar to Web2, but it's more of a back end change and maybe a different mindset with decentralization. So yeah, I think a lot of the tools and techniques will be helpful for testing out some of those vulnerabilities.
What languages do you typically find yourself using when you're testing out APIs?
What languages?
Yeah, or what languages are they based on? Like, is it like a JavaScript thing? Is it a Python thing? Is it?
Yeah, so I'm not on the developer side. I am pretty, I don't know. Yeah, I've seen APIs that are powered by lots of different things. There are certain tools that make it easier than others, certain languages that are easier than others. So I don't develop them at all. I just attack them and exploit them.
Have you written any tools?
Tools, no. No, I mean like scripts, sure. Yeah, I've scripted out different attacks and things like that, but I have not developed a tool.
So for your scripting, what's your language of choice?
Python.
Cool. I see Madeline
Which mainly,
over there.
you know, that all stems back to like my OSCP days, and they were big on Python, so that's where I went. How do you decide when to stop fuzzing? So yeah, that's a good question. I think that depends on the list that you're using for fuzzing. So you can get a really big list and use that, but also you have to have some constraints in mind. If you're performing a pen test, it's usually within a window. So can I make 1 million requests? As much as the client might not like that, it's probably also not feasible for me as an attacker to sit there and let 1 million requests run. So I'm going to pick and choose the requests I'm going to make and have a limited number of fuzzing attempts. So if I come across a single request that has, I don't know, maybe 25 parameters, then I'm going to keep my list down to maybe sub 20 to see how it reacts and go through and test each of those. And then if there's a unique response from one of those parameters, then I'm going to expand that list for that parameter to, you know, really drag it through testing to see what we can do with it. How do you know when to stop? I don't know. You just have to have those limitations in place that if you're not getting anything interesting and there's a lot of other requests to make, you have to manage your time and spread it out across all the unique requests.
So a question, not for you this time, Corey, but for one of our participants. And Joe, since you are in a pen testing organization, are you running API testing when you're doing your pen test?
Yeah, we have been. A teammate of mine is in here, Ryan. He can actually speak a little bit more on it than myself, but we're doing exactly the same thing. We're running Postman with Burp Suite Pro in between and stepping through each of the calls and stuff. So yeah, I'm still a newbie when it comes to that. So I'm glad that you wrote the book, because definitely was looking for information, and I found about Kite Runner and the different tools and everything. So it was good to see your process, and you talk about each of the tools, especially the collection, the Postman collection runner that I definitely want to look into as well.
Yeah, there's lots of cool things. I mean, if someone asked me, you know, if you're getting into API pen testing, which tool to spend the most time with, I think, yeah, Postman is the way to go, because you can get into not just the runner, but you can create your own tests, and those will pop out as unique. If you are looking for a specific response code or a specific response message, then you can script that all out. The other thing that you can script is you can chain requests together, which is really cool. And so I've done a couple of book giveaways on Twitter, and I use the Twitter API to get a list of all the people that participated in the giveaway. And then I will, Twitter only responds with 90, let's see, if we're talking about users, it would only respond with 90 users per request. So if we're talking about thousands, the way it works is it'll send you the 90 users, and at the very bottom it'll have a token to continue on to the next 90. And so you can use Postman to do some cool scripting where it'll take that token from the response and plug it into the next request. And so it's called request chaining. And that makes this task that would be annoying to sit there and request 90 users all on my own over and over and over to this chained event where it'll make the request, grab the token, put it in the next request, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it was really cool. I hadn't even heard of TypeRunner until I ran across your stuff. So I'm like looking forward to really exploring that and thinking like, how can this be used in a similar way to something like Shodan? It feels like a similar tool, and so
Shodan, I do have some techniques for Shodan in the book that goes through some of the searches that you can do for APIs out there. That's going to be more on the public information side of things, whereas KiteRunner is going to be an active tool similar to GoBuster, DirBuster, or FFUF, where it's going to interact with the target and it's going to make a bunch of requests. And they have their own word lists, which are based off of that searching the internet for all the API requests that are out there. So they have public word lists that you can use that are based on the work they put into that. And then you plug that into KiteRunner, and then it'll give you if you don't know if an API exists, or if you don't know the requests that you can make with an API, it will thoroughly test out an API provider to see what's available.
Good to know the difference. Thanks. And with that, or with mention of word lists, Severe asked, do you create your own fuzzing word list or use the commonly available ones?
Yeah, I do both. So again, with being on a limited schedule for a test, then I'm going to send some of those, use some of the word lists that are out there and available. But then once I'm focusing my testing more, then I'll create those custom word lists. And I typically, if I create a custom word list that isn't like sensitive to a specific client, it's more generic, then I'll just append that to whatever word list I'm using for the next test.
And building up your own library.
Yeah.
They ask again, if you create your own word list, any tips or tricks on how to create effective custom word lists for testing APIs?
Yeah, the most important thing here is going to be using the documentation that you have available. So if we're talking about mass assignment, one of the keys there was an API provider has a way to specify that a user is with a certain company or a user is an administrator. And getting back to that security through obscurity, as much as a company wants to protect their documentation or not and make it public and accessible, one of the things that is typically out there is administrative documentation. So you have the generic user and then you have the admin docs, which again might be public, might be private. And so if you can get your hands on something like that, then you can see the parameters that they're using in the administrative requests. So are they using is_admin = 1 when during an account creation for administrators? That information is actually going to be in that administrative documentation. It may not even be separate docs. There may be a part of their main documentation that just has an admin section that talks about that. So yeah, developing your word list, if you have admin documentation, that's going to give you the way that they're structuring their parameters and the way they're structuring their the different keys that are used. It's all going to be there. So adding that to your word list, that's a good way to develop it. There's some other tools that had, let's see, maybe other purposes, like I think it's called ICAP, which is one of those scripts that you can use to develop custom word list. If you're trying to guess someone's password, it'll ask you like, what is their dog's name? What are their kids' names? What year did they graduate? And then it'll generate these huge word lists with passwords and stuff. So you could use tools like that to maybe you've done some good OSINT on a client and you want to use some of that. Obviously good for trying to guess passwords. If you know how their tokens are generated, that's another way. Burp Suite has a module in it that you can use to analyze tokens. And if you, two ways of going about analyzing the tokens. One, you can add the request that creates the token to Burp Suite, or you can, if you have 20,000 tokens in a Word file, you can also submit those and it'll analyze either the Word file or it'll just make a bunch of requests and analyze like 40,000 tokens to determine if the token generation process is predictable. and how predictable it is. And I covered that in the authentication attacks in the book. And if you find out this common, you look at a request and it looks like a very complicated user ID or token that's being used, but you find out, just the last 4 digits are being updated, something like that, then you can go and attack those.
Can I ask you on the developer side, if you could speak to the developers and tell them your biggest pet peeves or things that you see that they could do to sanitize their code so this doesn't happen, what would that be? Because I think there's a disconnect between that side of things and us, and there needs to be a bridge in there somewhere so that when they're developing the code, we're not running into these problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The most prominent thing that I see, and it's the reason it's also number 1 on the OWASP API security list, is authorization problems. So automatically testing that users only have access to their own data.
Finish training. Ya ahorita vamos a ir arriba.
So yep, just making sure that users are only authorized to interact with and request their own data. That's the main thing. User A can only request and access user A's information, otherwise it's getting rejected.
So they need to understand least privilege on their end, in a nutshell.
So since Mike can't unmute, maybe I'll jump in here for a moment and take a moment to say, Corey, I'm so glad we had you here. This was a really great presentation, perfect for this group. I learned a bunch of things. I'd never heard of Kite Runner. Some of the stuff from Postman I'm going to check out. So thank you so much for your time. And I'll, accolades, definitely going to check out the book. It was worth my time. And I'm so glad you could be with us here tonight.
Yeah. And thanks so much for having me out. Great time. Great group. Yeah.
So 3-year anniversary. This is awesome. I can't believe it's been 3 years. And I think Mike's Zoom is acting up. So Mike, shall we call it? If there are other orders of business, you can put it in chat. Technology. Well, I want to say thanks to everyone for attending, and looking forward to B-sides as well. Mike, you're going to be here for it, but you'll obviously be on the other coast for parts of it coming up to it. So good luck on the move, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Real quick, you messaged me. I'll message you back. Sorry, I haven't gotten back to you. Just letting you know. But yeah, thank you very much, Corey, and everybody. That was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Very good. Take care.
Thank you, Corey.